please include your name and a way to get in touch with you so that as we communicate moving forward, you're sort of kept in the loop about what's happening. So in terms of next steps, what happens beyond this meeting? I'll just outline a few sort of broad things. We'll be coming out of these meetings and basically trying to gather up what we've been hearing over the past 2 to 3 weeks to try and make revisions to the engagement strategy that reflect the feedback we've been getting. Now, if you don't have the opportunity or don't feel inclined to share your feedback here today, there are other ways of providing feedback to this, and I'll put a slide up that sort of outlines that. But the deadline for all of that commentary before we go away and start revising is April the 16th. So once we hit April the 16th is when we're going to sort of begin with these next steps in terms of revising that engagement strategy and then beginning to implement different pieces of it. And one of the first things we want to do in that implementation phase is actually convene that Integrated Oceans Advisory Committee. And we hope to do that by June of this year. So that means that between now and June, we're going to be coming back to a lot of the different interest groups, well, all of them, and sectors, and asking those groups to identify participants in that committee. Once we convene that committee is when sort of the timeline starts ticking on the planning process, and we're setting a timeline of 2 years for this. So that starts once we convene that advisory committee. So as I mentioned, there are a number of different ways to provide feedback. One is through our discussions here today. You can also send written feedback to our email address here. You can mail it to me. You can phone and we can have further discussions. The feedback form that you have in front of you in hard copy on your tables is also available at our website. So if you don't take it away with you here today, you can find it online. So that's sort of, maybe I'll leave this up. That's a quick summary of the engagement strategy and a little bit about what we've been hearing to date about some of these engagement mechanisms. But I think what we can do now, when we bring these small group discussions together, is talk a little bit more. And for those of you that have questions either about the engagement strategy or want to know more about some of the things that different communities have been saying, we can follow up with that further.
Okay, I was just going to ask if there's any questions of Neil's presentation. Go ahead.
Is there any, you said briefly that you talk about what you heard so far. Is there any kind of view that's been coming out from the other communities on the coast as to where they'd like to see this go, or is there any kind of comments back that are kind of you're hearing from all the different communities?
Well, yeah, I mean, a few of the things that we've been hearing from all, or in a lot of places, certainly there's an interest in ensuring that there's, strong, more localized voices in this process. So the communities within PNCIMA, I think, share an interest in making sure that they have a meaningful voice in this. And one of the suggestions that's come out of that is finding a way to create structures that would allow people to have discussions at a more sub-PNCIMA level, an area that is perhaps of more interest to them. So that's one thing that we've been hearing. In terms of some of the priority issues, I'd say that a couple that have come up pretty regularly are things like marine transportation and associated development projects that might facilitate increases in certain kinds of marine transportation or traffic, shipping traffic. There's been a lot of talk about aquaculture, particularly on the North Island where it already exists. There's been quite a bit of discussion around the need for or an interest in creating strategies that allow locals to benefit from resources that are adjacent to their communities. And more broadly than that, I think seeking sort of economic opportunities or ways to enhance or encourage economic growth within communities. So those are maybe a few of the things that we've been hearing. I don't know if either Bruce or Rebecca or Hillary want to add anything to that in terms of
Another common one has been bringing science and local or traditional knowledge together to create a more kind of accessible information base for the different mechanisms that are actually implemented.
One other one too is the renewable ocean energy. Was a very common theme of interest in having a better understanding of that.
Any other questions, sort of general nature, for Neil?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. One of the outputs you noted in the plan there was spatial plans. And I'm wondering if you're anticipating multiple spatial plans, or is there...
The reason we put an S in there is I think we recognize that, you know, it's going to be a challenge to do everything we want in 2 years. And it's also a recognition that planning can happen on different scales. And so what you may have is you may have opportunities to develop spatial plans that address specific areas within PNCIMA, or that you may develop you know, a plan at one scale, and at some point down the road you develop more refined notions of what you want to be doing within that plan that address a more localized scale. So we're a little bit cautious about this idea of some one concrete, rigid master plan, rather allowing for a bit of flexibility in terms of what spatial planning looks like, and that we think about that as not a one-off kind of exercise, but rather something that is informed by issues as they arise through time. And so that plans kind of language we feel allows for that kind of possibility.
Could I just follow up with that? So the input you get from the advisory committee and all the other tables, where does that sort of correlate to development plan? Is that plan developed at the IOAC level, or is it developed by the planning office, the governance? Where does that actually get actualized?
So I think the plan is going to be a product of all of those different engagement mechanisms that are all going to inform the development of the plan. So the IOAC, different working groups, workshops, what we hear out of communities are all going to inform what different pieces of a plan look like. And part of the job of groups like the planning office and the steering committee are to also provide some of the framework and the guidance for what that plan needs to look like to address some of the government's responsibilities around an integrated management plan. You know, we have legislation and policy that ask us to do certain things with an integrated management plan. So now in terms of is an IOAC group actually sitting down and typing up an integrated management plan? No. I don't think we're asking an advisory committee to do that. I don't think that's a typical request from an advisory structure. Rather, we would probably have groups or individuals within the planning office working in collaboration with the IOAC and with working groups, etc., to develop that plan. And that what the process looks like past that is really about a dialogue between all those who have been a part of that collaboration and those governance framework structures, so that what eventually goes to decision makers in different government agencies like the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and so on down the line is informed by that dialogue and hopefully reflects a shared set of interests and some common ground in terms of what the plan needs to look like.
Anything else for now? There's going to be lots of opportunity for discussion when we break up here. Go ahead, last one to you.
You put the star with the planning office kind of in the